Hope you all had a good afternoon. Tonight I want to take a look at the idea or the power of example. Uh, Consider what kind of example we are, or what the example that a Christian ought to be, and look at some of those impacts. So let's begin by looking at the importance of an example. Uh, I think it can be argued, or it can be proven, that we are creatures of imitation. We imitate what we see, what we like. Um, just as the old adage that often is said, like father, like son, is normally true. We see those character traits that are passed down because of what some psychiatrists call learned behavior. Uh, and so we emulate things that we're exposed to, things that we like, uh, and we take on those behavior patterns based upon those environmental, what's it called, um, stimuli, if you will, that goes down through our ages as we from young individuals clear up until we leave this earth. So this may help explain why it's so important to have why examples are so important in life, because they do make a huge impact on us, whether it's cognitive or subconsciously. It does make a huge impact upon us. So the power of example, I would argue, is great, whether we recognize it or not. It does affect you. It is one of the most greatest powers known to man. It is a power that all possess, that all possesses, and a force that all must handle. Like I say, sometimes this can be cognitive, and then sometimes it's just subconscious that we take on behaviors from examples that are presented by us by others. Uh, and we can also break this down and say that there's also two types of example from a cognitive standpoint. There's position. What I would argue is positional power. This is power by the stature of your position, if you will. Like an elder would have a higher positional power than that of the normal Christian, as well as the preacher or the teacher. During class, the class instructor or the class teacher has a higher positional power than that of the students. So I think it's easy to understand this. Within our country, the person that has the highest positional power in the country is what we would call the President of the United States, because he is elected to that position, and it is deemed actually by law that is the highest position within the country. So positional power, it has great influence, and it's also something that's often either delegated, given, or taken by an individual. Then there's what I would call probably perhaps even the more powerful type of power, and that's influential or personal power. You may have positional power over somebody, kind of like I think we've probably all seen movies where we see CEOs that were kind of what we would call tyrants that ruled with an iron fist, and you'll do this and you'll do that, and often they take their organizations to a certain point, but often, especially in this world, in this day and age, I think it could be argued that that's often not the most effective way to lead a group of individuals. It works. I won't deny that. But often, if you use your personal power, that is the power of your influence, to persuade others, it has a much greater effect. And often, people at the lowest levels can have great power, great persuasion, over others. Man, I wish I would have thought some of these ahead of time, but many movements in the United States, for instance, like the Civil Rights Movement, a lot of it attribute to Rosa Parks, just a small girl at that time, had great influential power. She sparked something that had been festering for ages in the South. And it wasn't brought about by some high ranking official that said, this is what we're going to do. It was brought about because a certain girl got on a bus and decided to sit at a particular place where she was told that she was not supposed to. So she had no positional power whatsoever, but she had great influential power. And so those are two powers that I think we need to be cognitive of and to realize that we have as individuals as well as Christians. The Bible recognizes the great power of example for good and evil. Uh, Good examples in the scriptures would be godliness. Noah is attributed to as being a godly individual, and we won't read it, but we can read that over in Genesis chapter 6, verses 6 through 7. He was so godly that it was only him and his immediate family, 8 individuals that were saved from the cleansing of the earth by God. Uh, so he was definitely a very influential, or had great influential power, if you will. Maybe he wasn't able to influence the people of his age, but he was able to influence, obviously, God, because God chose him. And then he also influenced the rest of his family. Then we have the example of faith, and Abraham is attributed to being one of great faith. And that's mentioned over in what often is referred to as the chapter of the heroes of faith, if you will, the Bible that are mentioned down through there. But Abraham was a man of great faith, and that is attributed to him. Uh, Job. Job is often attributed to being a man of great patience. Remember, he was tempted and over and over and over. People begged him, "Denounce your God. This will go. This will go away." And he never wavered. He had great enduring patience. What a great example Job was. Daniel. Over Daniel chapter 6. Remember, Daniel stood up for what? For, for the Lord. Well, basically, he was told that you can't worship, you can't do this, you can't do that. But he never wavered. He had great courage, and he did what he knew was right in the eyes of the Lord, not what was right in the eyes of men. And he was cast into a den of lions, and any normal man would have been devoured, but when they came back in the morning, there was Daniel and the lions, and nothing happened. So a man of great courage. And then Moses. Moses is a man of great endurance, if you will. Moses was tried over and tried over and over and over, but he endured and he endured and he endured. Uh, and we can take into consider Hebrews chapter 11. Again, the chapter on heroes of faith. And I'll go ahead and read this one, beginning in verse 24. It says, "By faith Moses, when he became of age, refused to be called sons of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to suffer affliction with the people of God than to enjoy the passing pleasures of sin, esteeming the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures in Egypt, for he looked to the reward. By faith he forsook Egypt, not fearing the wrath of the king, but enduring as he seeing him who is invisible." Uh, so again, Moses is a great and powerful example for us for enduring things. And then we can look to Joshua. Joshua, I would argue, was as a great example of leadership. Not only when he went over and was one of the spies, he was also the right hand man to Moses. But he went, uh, over in Joshua chapter 24, verse 31. This is even a great quoted verse yet today, and many wall ornaments and placards carry this the saying that Joshua gave here. Uh, and when we read there, it says, Israel served the Lord in all the days of Joshua and all the days of the elders and outlived Joshua, who had known all the works of the Lord which he had done for Israel. Uh, he was a great man of leader. I was thinking of the verse where it mentions, uh, as for me and my house, I will serve the Lord. You choose whom you will serve, but as for me and my house, I will serve the Lord. He was a great leader. Remember what the 12 spies that went over into the land of Canaan and came back. 10 of them were just horrified and just saying there was a land of giants and there was no way that they could conquer those people. But Joshua was one of two that says, "What are you talking about? We got the Lord on our side. We can easily conquer those people." So he was a great man of leadership. So as we can see there throughout the Old Testament, there are many examples, great examples, if you will, of men who did great good, as well as men who did great evil. And we can look at some of those examples in the scriptures as well, such as we just mentioned the 10 spies. The 10 who came back with the bad report, who I would say used hyperbole and over exaggerated the situation. They influenced an entire nation of people by the lack of and discouraged them and caused them to have a lack of faith. And because of that, they wandered in um, in the wilderness for 40 years. And then we can look at Korah over in Numbers chapter 16. Because of Korah's evil influence, God destroyed Korah, Dathan, Abiram, and their families, a total of 250 men and 14,700 others, because she wanted to rise up against Moses at the time. She didn't like what was going on, and therefore sparked a great uh, uprising, if you will. Consider Numbers chapter 16, verse 3. It says, They gathered together against Moses and Aaron and said to them, You take too much upon yourselves, for all the congregation is holy, every one of them, and the Lord is among them. Why then do you exalt yourselves above the assembly of the Lord? Again, just trying to provoke uh, uh, things, and certainly that's what happened. But God dealt harshly with them. And then King Saul is an example of a person who did great evil. Started out as a very devout man, a humble man, if you will, but power corrupts, and it certainly corrupted Saul. Uh, and you can read the example there, to the point that where God had to remove him from his position. And also, he was more concerned with placating to the people than he was adhering to what God had told him. I remember they went out and conquered a particular group of people, and God said, You destroy everything. Don't bring back anything. Even though it was custom at the time to bring back the plunder, the riches, if you will, to the. And what did he do? He captured the king and brought him back for himself. And the Lord said, You were told not to do this. But the people, this is what the people did. So he did evil in the eyes of the Lord. And then even in the New Testament time, the Pharisees in the time of Jesus are an example of people who did evil. Some might argue, well, they really weren't that evil. Well, in the eyes of God, they certainly were evil because they led people astray. But consider a couple verses over there in Matthew chapter 6, like verse 2 says, Therefore, when you do a charitable deed, do not sound the trumpet before you, as the hypocrites do. In other other words, they would do something that would be good, but their motive for doing it was not to do good, but to bring prestige upon themselves. And they would go, hey, look at me. Look what I did. I'm such a great man. I look at this generous deed that I did. And going on, and let's see, trumpets before the hypocrites do in the synagogues or in the streets, that they may have glory from men. Surely I say to you that they have their reward. And then in verse 5, Christ goes on to say, and when you pray, you shall not pray like the hypocrites or the Pharisees, for they love to pray standing in the synagogues and in the corners of the street, that they may be seen by men. In other words, they were prostrating themselves to say, so that people would walk by and say, oh, that's a great holy man. Look at how he prays. That was their modus of operandi. He goes on to say, that they may be surely seen by men, and surely I say to you that they have their reward. In other words, their prayers were useless because they served the purpose that they purposed to have them to do. And so they were, Christ pointed over and over how they did evil in the eyes of the Lord. And then down in Matthew chapter 23, verses 1 through 3, it says, then Jesus spoke to the multitude and his disciples, saying, the scribes and the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat. Therefore, whatever they tell you to observe, that observe and do. But do not do according to the works, for I say, do and do not do. In other words, if they command you to do something, you go ahead and do it because of their what? Positional power. However, due to their lack of influential power or their personal power, the personal power was corrupt. They did things for the wrong motive. Don't follow that example. Don't be like them, is basically what Christ is telling them. And then it has been said that precepts tell us our duties, and examples show us that it is possible. Many examples are given to us. Why? So that we may follow those examples. Old Testament is given for learning. We pointed this out this morning. And that's what's reinforced there in those two verses, like Romans chapter 15, verse 4, it says, for whatever things were written before were written for our learning. That we don't fall under the Old Testament law, but the Old Testament law is there so that we may learn and know the nature of God. And the same thing is emulated over there in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 6, where it says, now these things became our example to the intent that we should not lust after evil things as they also lusted. So again, examples are given so we may know what to do, or we may know what not to do. And then Christ is also given to us in the New Testament as the perfect example. We see Peter emulates that over in 2 Peter. 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 21 through 25, and I'll just read there verse 21 where it says, for to this we were called, because Christ also purified us, leaving us an example that you should follow in his footsteps. And then if you go over to Philippians chapter 2, verses 1 through 11, I won't read that, but Paul writes in great detail the humility of Christ and how we are to emulate that same humility that Christ emulated during his time here on earth. So there are many, the Bible certainly stresses the importance of an example, both in the positive and in the negative aspect. Paul understood also the importance of an example. He was aware of his own example. He would often say, emulate me just as I emulate Christ. And that's what he said there in 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 1. He says, imitate me just as I also imitate Christ. So in other words, I am an apostle. I received this from Christ or the Holy Spirit, however you want to represent that. Uh, and so, therefore, I do what was commanded to me, and you can follow my example uh, as well. He also commanded others to set a proper example for others. He did this for the two letters that he wrote to Titus, as well as Timothy, reminding them of their positional power that they would have as teachers, if you will, and then also to use their greater power, their influential power, uh, that of their character, and to always be cognitive of that. We can consider what he said there in wrote to Titus there in Titus chapter 2, verses 7 and 8, where it says, in all things showing yourselves to be a pattern of good works, in doctrine showing integrity, reverence, and incorruptibility, sound speech that cannot be condemned, that one who is an opponent may be ashamed, having nothing evil to say about you. So what is he saying? Make sure you talk the talk and you also walk the walk, is basically what he's saying. Because if you don't, there are going to be adversaries who come after you that will use your example against you to say, why do you want to listen to this guy? He did these corrupt things, blah, 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 blah. And we see that in our politics yet here today. People try to uh, take the mistakes or bad examples of others to denounce them or to decharacterize them, if you will. And the same thing was taking place back then. So Paul was reinforcing the importance of being a good example, especially that of a teacher. He told Timothy over in 1 Timothy chapter 4, verse 12, it says, let no one despise your youth, but be an example to the believers in word. In other words, be an example by living and doing what the word says to do. In conduct, in love, in spirit, in faith, and in purity, is what he told Timothy. So, in other words, be a great moral character, not according to what man would have you do, but according to what God would have you to do. Because if you emulate these things, I don't have it up I got the verse in my on my screen here. In conduct, in love, in spirit, in faith, and in purity, then against that nothing can stand. Nothing can detract you from your work as an evangelist, because not only are you a messenger of God, but you're also doing the things that you're preaching, commanding others to do. So the importance of an example can really be seen throughout the scriptures if we take the time to stop, pause, and look. It's real easy when we're studying to kind of, and especially when at home reading, kind of just to kind of speed read and go through these things and kind of miss these highlights as, why was Paul saying these things? But that's why we have these studies like this, is so that we can take a pause and take a focus and look and to see what is actually, one of the things that are being taught by what was written. So now that we talked about and we've stressed what the importance of an example is, both positive and negative, good versus evil, as well as being an influential power, whether you're a young man like Timothy or like an apostle like Paul, both had great influential power over those that they preached and taught to. So now let's look at how Christians are to be an example not only to ourselves, but also to those, what we would say, out in the world. We are the Christians are to be a light unto the world. In other words, be an example unto the world. That's what Christ in the Beatitudes stress. He says, you are the light of the world. A city that is set on a hill cannot be hidden, nor do they light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a lampstand, and it gives light to all who are in the house. Let your light shine before men, or be an example before men, that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven. So that's, mission number one. Be a let them see your good works that will glorify God in heaven due to your good example. So those who claim to be a Christian always influence people in one way or the other. You influence them either to the positive aspect, where people will say, you know, I kind of like what you stand for. I kind of like the things that you do. I would like to learn more about Christianity. Why you do the things that you do. And then there's the role of kind of like the hypocrite or the Pharisee, if you will. Those who people know that you are a Christian, but you behave like a non-Christian, and that's a negative influence because a lot of people, especially those who are already warring against Christianity, if you will, they will say, "Well, I don't want to be like that hypocrite over there. What good's he doing?" So that use you in an argument to reinforce their own beliefs. I would call this the fishbowl effect. We've talked about that before. You know how fish, when you get that goldfish at the fair, you bring him home and you plop him into a bowl. He can't hide anywhere. No matter where you stand on what side of that bowl, you can always see that fish. Same thing for the Christian. You may think you might be able to hide yourself and disguise yourself, but people are always aware, people are always watching, people are always cognitive of who and what you are. So as a Christian, we must realize that the world is judging Christianity by us. And they will not use this so much as a good influence, but they will certainly capitalize on our bad influence and use it and weaponize it to call us out, if you will, for being hypocrites. So that's why we need to be careful of the example that we set forth by others. We can all, Thomas Jefferson, even one of the founding fathers of this country, even pointed out the importance of an example to the point that that's how he measured a man's how religious he was. He's quoted in saying, "I always judge a man's religion by his life." In other words, by what he does. For it is from our lives and not our words that our religion must be read. So, in other words, another age-old adage, you can say anything that you want to, but that doesn't necessarily make it true. It's what you do that what matters, and that's what you're going to be judged on. So you can go out there and preach. You can be the best preacher in the world, and you can go out there and evangelize and influence a lot of people. And we see this in TV evangelists who have hundreds of thousands of followers. And then a few years go down, and then these individuals are caught in adulterous relationships, caught in gambling schemes, they embezzle funds, they do all kinds of evil things. And often when that happens, that organization, I won't say it at that church, but that organization that they built with their influential power often crumbles. And who ultimately suffers for that? Those who call themselves Christians. Because all Christians are measured against the behavior of those individuals. And so we may not be those individuals. God won't use that against us, but just realize the world will use that against us. And so that's why it's even more important that we be a good example unto the world. 1 Timothy 4:12 reveals that those areas in which the Christians are to be good examples, and we read these by the word. We must be careful what we say and how we say it. We don't want to use provocative words. We don't want to incite people, if you will. By our manner of life. Remember, Paul said, "But be an example to believers in word, in conduct, in love, in spirit, in faith, and purity," is what we read. And so, manner of life. Never forget that people are always observing. That fishbowl effect. They're always looking. Uh, and love. We need to emulate love. Just as much as God loves us, we need to love our fellow man. And remember, Christ said, you know, I, you know, I also command you to love your enemies. Whoever heard told that? Uh, that's still a hard thing for a lot of people to digest yet today. And it's been what, 2,000 and some years since Christ came to this earth. That's just something that most people cannot compute with. Um, but yet, that's what we were commanded to do, to love our enemies and to love our fellow man just as much as we love ourselves. That is not the way of the world. The way of the world says it's survival of the fittest. You look out for you, number one, and do things that will perpetuate you, not those around you. That's the way of the world. And we can easily get caught up in all that if we're not careful. But that's not what God would have us to do. He would have us to be the opposite example. And spirit, what's our attitude? Do we personify uh, attributes of somebody who's holy? What kind of attitude do we have? Are we an optimistic person, like what the scriptures would have us to be, or are we more of a pessimistic person? Uh, by faith, we are to be examples of faith, weak or strong, little or great. It doesn't matter. We are examples of faith, and people will measure that. And purity. And this might be, the one that everybody wants to pick. Do others see your desire to remain unspotted before the world? And what I mean by unspotted, do people see you as a peculiar people who don't do things like the rest of the world? Uh, are you being different, not from a different from the aspect of different by what you wear and by different uh, by in a negative way, but different in a positive way. That when people are cussing and cursing or drinking and carousing, you're not participating in those things. When your neighbors, are doing whatever, and invite you over to participate in those festivities, you politely just say, I appreciate the invite, but that's just not who I am. Um, and uh, that's being a positive example. Uh, People may look at you and call you, well, you're square or whatever, uh, and make fun of you and ridicule you, but we were never promised that we wouldn't be persecuted, were we? But the point remains that we should exercise purity. In other words, we must live and breathe as the Scriptures has commanded us to do. If not, then we are being a bad example, and we're defaming the name of God. So that's our lesson tonight. We again pointed out the power of an example. Uh, we looked at the importance of an example. We looked at how the Scriptures emphasizes good examples as well as evil examples, examples to follow and examples not to follow. Uh, were given for us for our learning, just as the Old Testament. And then we talked about how Christians are to be examples, how we are to be a light, a shining beacon unto the world, how we are to remain unspotted and unblemished before those in the world. That we are not to be like the Pharisees, to be hypocrites, and to do things that go against what the Scriptures say. Because we have great influential power, that greatest power that we talked about, we don't have to have positional power to have great effect on people's lives. It's more so like what Thomas Jefferson says. I look to a man's example by what he does to measure how religious he is, not by what he says he is. And so, certainly, uh, we need to be good examples unto all the world. So that's the lesson, and I'll leave it to you. Now we want to extend the invitation